What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Canes Baseball Podcast by CanesInSight, powered by NHR and Levine Accident Attorneys. We had the all-star team here as we get ready for ACC play. We got Mr. Perfect himself, Javi Salas, who threw out a victorious first pitch with a win against Villanova, commemorating his perfect game 11 years ago. And then Sebastian Font, you know him. So we had to bring out the big guns for ACC play. But first, a word from some of the best friends that Canes Baseball has.
Sala, Astorita & Cox is a boutique law firm focusing on securities regulatory matters, broker-dealer and investment advisor regulation, white-collar criminal defense, complex commercial litigation, and securities arbitration and litigation. The firm aggressively represents clients throughout the nation. Our lawyers have over 100 years of collective experience handling securities and white-collar criminal matters, including investigations, regulatory proceedings, and enforcement actions in federal, state, and administrative courts. We have also handled investigations conducted by congressional subcommittees. The firm's partners draw from past experience working at the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Department of Justice, a national brokerage house, and on Wall Street. Their in-depth experience includes representing clients with matters involving securities regulation, white-collar criminal defense, and securities arbitration and litigation. Contact us now at 561-989-9080 or visit us online at salalaw.com.
All right, folks, this is it. ACC play is right around the corner. No rest for the weary after a disappointing, to say the least, loss to UCF with Wake Forest coming up. Before I get to you guys, just setting the stage, really great post by Relly Rel on the CanesInSight baseball board, the Ron Frazier board, which, you know, if you're not on there, you're a baseball fan, get on there. It's free. The best discussion, a lot of venting after games, but just a lot of lively discussion for free. But basically last year after 18 games, Miami was 11-7. This year, 12-6. They allowed 103 runs after 18 games last year. They've cut that down substantially to 77, but the run score taking a dip, 166 last year, 152 this year, and struggling with really quality opponents, right? The quality opponent is at that performance has been down. And then, of course, the midweek, you're still kind of hovering around 500. It's tough midweek this week with UCF, but you haven't seen huge improvement in that area. So, Javi, you were here with me every week last year. What are you seeing this year compared to last year?
It's been tough. I mean, obviously the last, 4 games as a Canes fan have been obviously the most difficult part to stomach, right? We had a UConn team that comes into Coral Gables and takes 2 or 3. Something that maybe, fans might not have expected. You see a team from the Northeast early in the season, but it was a good UConn ball club. I mean, let's give them credit because that's a good team. They've been, on the cusp of Omaha. It seems like the last 5 or 6 years or so, they've been in a couple supers. But nonetheless, a disappointing weekend for the Canes. And then, you parlay that into a game against UCF where it was never really close it was a 3-2 game at the second inning. And it seemed like that was the last point where the Canes really had a chance in that game. And, definitely disappointing. And I think, what we have to look forward to and what we have to sort of be leery of is that the ACC schedule is upon us. We got 30 games against some of the best competition in the country. I think, I was listening to your show today with Pete and Mike, and the ACC pound for pound is probably the best conference in the country. I mean, you go up and down that league and you look at all 16 teams and you go, there's not a weekend where you can really rest. There's no weekend where you can say, hey, this is a guaranteed win for anybody. We saw a Stanford team last week go into Chapel Hill and take 2 or 3 from Carolina, who was top 5 at the time, right? So it's a great league. It's super deep. There's 30 games for the Canes and, ahead of us, but, it's going to be a tough weekend here in Winston-Salem.
Yeah, so Sebastian, getting to you, I know you were with me watching this team in fall camp, and obviously you were with the team in the summer. What is something that you didn't see with the team, let's say against UCF or Connecticut, that you did see in camp and maybe they can get back to? Like just something that you're waiting to see translate on the field that you think is still in the tank with the squad?
Yeah, so I mean, being in the locker room and stuff, these guys actually have a lot of confidence. They have that swagger that you need to be a top 25 team. You need to have to go in and beat great teams, right? We've seen it in flashes here and there, but for the most part, we've been really flat, and a lot of people have pointed that out. And that's why you see us get behind early in games. And it really showed with that UCF game. a lot of errors here and there thrown in. And once we got down, it really looked like we were just down for the count, right? There wasn't that swagger, that confidence that we had in the fall. And granted, you're facing your own guys. Everyone's really having a good time getting to know each other. But these guys are all very confident during their summer ball. We need to see that going into ACC play, right? Everyone's counting the team out. You go ask anyone, they're counting the Canes out. These guys need to go in there and prove themselves against ACC play.
Yeah, and setting the stage for ACC play, Javi, we talked about this offline. I talked about it on the show, like you mentioned. I'm just looking at the 2025 mock draft for Baseball America. First pick, Jamie Arnold, Florida State. Then you go down to the 6th pick, and there's high school guys in between there. So just kind of going college to college. Merrick Houston, shortstop for Wake Forest. We'll see him this weekend. Number 8 pick, Ethan Conrad, center fielder, Wake Forest. Just going down the line, you're talking about guys. The catcher for North Carolina, Luke Stevenson, number 13 to the Giants. You got Stanford's Friday starter is here in the mock draft. Another guy who now is in the league. So it seems like just going through Louisville's Friday starter in there. Cam Canarella, the center fielder for Clemson. He's in that top 30. So just going up and down the list of this top 30 for the mock draft, it's ACC all over the place, and 2026 isn't really much different.
Yeah, it's a tremendous league, and it goes to show the depth of the league itself, but also the star power at the top of every single team, right? I mean, I'm gonna age myself here, but a decade ago was, you went into this conference and there, I'm not going to single any universities out, but those a couple universities that you'd look at and you'd be like, well, we got to sweep these guys, or we got to get 2 or 3, or else it's a really disappointing weekend. And you look at this list 10 years later and you try and think to yourself, hey, we got to figure out how we're going to win, 15, 16 games and be above 500. Because I think in this league, you're probably hosting a regional if you win 15 or 16 conference games. That's how deep and how tough this league is. The star power is tremendous. I mean, we're talking offline, right? I mean, there's going to be some big leaguers that were playing against Miami a year and a half ago, maybe even last season, right? You're going to see next weekend with Florida State, Jamie Arnold come into town, and he's a consensus top 3 pick. He's one of the best left-handed pitchers in baseball, and it's a treat to watch. It's obviously a nightmare to play against if you're a Miami Hurricane right now, but the league is super deep. I think obviously the star power is everywhere. Something that we've seen, I think the last couple of years is a renaissance of college baseball, right? More games are televised than ever. There's a ton of star power. You're seeing guys get quicker from college to the pros and play at the major league level. It's because the talent is so good, the games are so competitive, and they're playing at like a high A minor league level, right? You look at some of these top of the line SEC and ACC games, it's comparable to a minor league game. There's just talent all over the field. So again, it's exciting to be a fan of the conference. It's exciting to be part of this conference. It's a nightmare if you're trying to win a bunch of games in it, because every single weekend's going to be a dogfight. And, the Hurricanes got to be up for the challenge, man. I think there's 30 games. And to Sebastian's point, a lot of folks externally are counting them out. They're going to be the underdog here probably the next 3 weekends against Wake Forest, against Florida State, and against Carolina. But it's a tremendous opportunity to hopefully turn the tide of what's been a tough couple of weekends.
And before we get into some of the issues, by the way, Bullpen Mafia, go support Javi's podcast covering all of baseball, including the major leagues. Awesome stuff. Best merch in the game, I got to say. I mean, I wear this shirt just if I'm feeling a little
looks good on you, D. It looks good on you, man. Slow down.
And shout out to all the things you're doing in the business world and personally as well. Marrying Mrs. Perfect. Shout out to Mrs. Perfect and the future Solace family. So one thing I wanted to ask you about Javi specifically before we get to Sebastian is, looking at a bright spot from my perspective, we talked back in fall when I went to the fall camp. I was like, man, we got this guy Tate Durias, right-hander. He looks pretty talented, big. Just it's hard. Anybody can you don't need to be a scout to really see the athleticism, the size, the frame, and just kind of the juice. Seeing him also, Lachi Collera, Mikey Fernandez had a tough game against UCF, but you see the talent there. Siskar, some of the young arms that we brought in. You as a pitcher, one of the top pitchers of your time at Miami. What do you see from these guys as far as future building blocks?
Yeah, look, I think one of the bright spots, you hit the nail on the head, is that freshman relief pitching. I've seen all 3 of those guys. I haven't seen Mikey Fernandez throw live. I did see him throw in the spring and in the fall leading up to the season, but Ciscar, Darius, and Calera have been awesome. I think, obviously their roles are going to continue to expand as the season goes on. I think they've proven that they can pitch in all sorts of situations. Ciscar's probably pitched in the most high leverage of those. We've seen Darius come in in the ninth inning of some games, sort of clean some stuff up, but his stuff's probably the best of all of them, right? I think his ceiling is probably the highest in terms of what he is. I think he's really raw, hasn't played a whole lot of baseball in his career. And it kind of shows in the sense that, like, the arm is live, the fastball explodes out of his hand. He's learning how to throw a breaking ball, learning how to mix in a changeup too. Like, he's going to be one I really enjoy to watch. I think the furthest along in the three is AJ Ciscar. I think in terms of polish and poise on the mound, he definitely looks like he's not a freshman. He looks like he's been around the game a long time, knows how to handle himself, looks like he knows how to navigate through an order, which is something you want to see out of a freshman arm, right? I think that's the hardest part, is learning how to pitch against really good competition, and he's doing just that. And then last, Calera's been awesome. He was obviously the highest touted prospect of the three. There was rumblings of him possibly being, one of the top draft choices in last year's amateur draft. So, obviously the talent was there. He was dealing with some injuries, but he looks amazing too. I saw him throw at Marlins Park, and the first 2 outs of his inning were absolutely electric. I mean, the fastball was exploding out of his hand, really good breaking ball. Looks like one of those guys physically that's going to have a huge role at Miami. Again, and for him, it's just about getting healthy and staying healthy and, forging a long-term role for this ball club.
It's funny when I see you at the stadium at Mark Light, you tower over a lot of these guys, right? I mean, just be honest. Like, I see you walking around, you're towering over a lot of players on the team. Those 3, you don't necessarily tower over, which is a good sign when I see you out there. Some physicality there.
Yeah, no, those are super physical bodies. And I think that that's something that, the coaching staff identified last season. We probably didn't have, at least from a stature perspective, the starting pitching. And look, you talk to any scout in Major League Baseball, whether they want to admit it or not, they look for big physical bodies on the pitcher's mound because there is a ton of wear and tear. You're seeing it now at the pro level, right? How many guys are going down with Tommy John? Injuries are part of the game. One way you try and mitigate that is by having guys who are not going to put a ton of stress on their arms and are bigger in stature. And those 3 guys definitely looked the part.
Sebastian, what can you tell us about the kind of the mindset of the team to the extent or just knowing kind of, look, obviously they're disappointed with the way UConn went and the way UCF went. Where's the focus of, hey, this is where we got to just get better and improve, and we're not performing up to the standard?
Yeah, I think you saw that in, I believe it was Jake Ogden and Derek Williams after the UConn game on Sunday. They flat out went into the interview and said, we played pissed off, right? They didn't play well the first 2 games against UConn and came out on Sunday and scored a ton of runs, right? But it's one thing to just say it, and then it's one thing to continuously do it. And I think that a lot of these guys are, again, guys coming up to the power 4 level, wanting to prove themselves, wanting to, whether it's just an internal thing or whether it's for the draft, right? And I think that they will all get together, right? The team's very close. They're all very together. They do everything together. They Bible study, this, that, and the other together, and they'll get it right. They'll call a meeting. They'll get the mindset right. So you hopefully see a much more competitive team going into ACC play.
One glaring spot kind of on the field that you're concerned about, at least I'm concerned about, is first base, right? So last year, we had Urso at first base at the end of the year, kind of a symbol of, this is not where Miami needs to be when you have a, kind of a backup middle and utility infielder kind of guy starting at first base at the University of Miami. And Javi, that was something we talked about, that just we needed a little more there, especially when you're playing Florida and seeing Caglione and guys like that, at that position. It was a clear gap, right, at that particular spot. Going the offseason, you had Todd Hudson, who really hit great in fall camp, was going opposite field, was really in rhythm. You knew it'd be a struggle, kind of adjust or a transition adjusting to first base because he hadn't played it. Now you're seeing more of Renzo Gonzalez, probably more for defense. There's been some talk. Do you move Jake Ogden off shortstop to first with Brandon Degody, who's hit well in limited action playing shortstop? How do we solve this kind of first base issue and without focusing on any one guy, just like, what do we need at that position?
It's a great question, right? The $1 million question. And I don't know that there is a solution right now. I mean, obviously they're trying to piece it together as best they can. We saw Renzo get the start yesterday against UCF. I think you just got to keep tinkering. You got to keep throwing guys at the position, whether that's some of your outfielders, guys on the bench. At the end of the day, you got to have your best 9 hitters out there in whatever capacity that is. They got to score runs, right? And we haven't done from a pitching perspective. we're not really preventing the run scoring. So we gotta score some runs. We got to figure out a way to do it rather quickly. There's been some bright spots offensively. Obviously, you mentioned Jake Ogden, Daniel Cuvée, right? He's the best third baseman in the country. But the first base, they haven't gotten any production. That's a big spot in the lineup, right? We expected a little better from Todd Hudson, and he's struggled. It's no secret. I'm sure he'd be the first one to tell you, right? He's hasn't held up his end of the bargain, and I hope that he does turn it around. But right now, JD and the coaching staff's got to tinker around, try and see how they get their best 9 out there. And again, it's not easy. It's not easy to do. It's trial and error, and we're going to see probably some more growing pains. But at the end of the day, there's 30 ACC games for them to get it right.
Center field is another one that's interesting, right? Because you had Mikey Torres, who just watching in camp defensively, the best I've seen out there in a long, long time. Incredible arm, makes all the plays, it has a little flair with it. And then Fabio Peralta also, good defender, made a nice diving catch this week. But we haven't seen really. I guess Peralta's hitting better. Torres was walking quite a bit. You're seeing Peralta get more and more playing time there. Sebastian, just what do you see? Obviously, you played center field. Obviously, I know it's sensitive with these guys. I'm just in general, kind of like, what do you think JD's looking for at that position going forward with two freshman lefty guys that on paper are pretty similar?
Yeah, so I think in the offseason and heading into the spring, right, a lot of people really didn't give Fabio the credit he deserves as a defensive center fielder, right? I mean, deservedly so. Mikey Torres is one of the best defensive center fielders in the country, right? But Fabio wasn't that far behind, and a lot of people made it seem like there was this really big gap between them. And I said in a couple of posts that they're a lot closer than people think, and it's going to come down to the hitting, right? Whether it's getting on base, having quality at bats, and I think that's what Fabio is bringing a bit more right now. He's kind of more of a spark plug, right? Like, granted, Mikey was getting on base a lot, but he really wasn't doing anything to spark plug with that. I think that's why JD opted for the change to try and get something going with Fabio in center field. I think that probably going into this weekend, it's a toss-up to see who plays, right? They both had their opportunity. They've both done, a considerable job in the 9-hole with it. It might be, as you say, they might flip-flop back and forth until one of them really starts to take it by the hand when it comes to hitting.
The starting pitching, to me, that's kind of the focus I have going into this weekend, going against such a high-powered lineup with 2 top 10 picks and some, more studs than that on the road, right? This is a starting lineup starting 3 that we were really excited about, Javi. We talked about it offline, coming out of some of the softer part of the schedule, just seeing, how it was coming out of their hands, not so much the competition, but just how they were throwing. I thought Florida, they pitched pretty well. Obviously, UConn was a tougher road. What are you looking for from those guys? I'm talking about Robert, Hugus, and Walters heading into this Wake Forest series.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think obviously the last weekend you hope is an anomaly for those 3 guys, right? 3 short starts. You get a short start this Tuesday out of Giroux and at UCF. So like I was telling you offline, it's really hard to win a baseball game when you're not getting deep, starting pitching, right? Unless you're the Tampa Bay Rays and you figured out how to do this opener stuff and can throw 9 different guys in a game. It's just not the reality of college baseball. Your starter's got to get you, I always think about 18 outs, right? How do I get my starter to get me 18 outs? That gets you into the 6th inning. It's much easier to play a baseball game when you have that in your back pocket, right? And those 3 guys didn't do that last weekend against UConn. And I hope it's an anomaly, like I just said. I think, if you're JD, if you're Laz Gutierrez, you got to kind of call those guys out. You got to lean on them, because I think the reality is if we're going to have success in the ACC portion of the schedule, those guys are going to have to, to be the horses, and you're going to have to lean on those guys for, hey, it's going to be 18 plus today from you, Nick Robert. We need a little more out of you, Griffin Hugus. We need some more out of you, Brian Walters. And it's been a tough week on the bullpen, right? Some short starts against UConn, a short start against UCF. We saw a lot of guys stretched out. And it's not an easy place to pitch at Wake Forest. It's a small ballpark. The ball flies. Its wind is always blowing out there. For whatever reason, you go to Wake Forest and you see some crazy stuff, man. The wind is always howling. It seems like it's going straight out. It's like 300 all the way around. They got a weird outfield. So you hope that those guys can pitch inside, knock some of those Wake Forest guys down off the plate a little bit, expand the zone. And more than anything, just go deep into the game. Give these guys a chance to win. And I think they certainly have the capability to do that. Look, I've been high on the starting pitching since week one. I thought, again, they've definitely looked a lot better than what I anticipated. The stuff is there. You look at Robert and Hughes, and then on Walters on Sunday, right? Walters has electric stuff. And from a stuff perspective, he might have the best stuff of the three of them, and he's pitching on Sunday. So it just goes to show you the depth of this pitching staff, the starting pitching staff. But now it's just, hey, let's put it into practice. Let's get some outs. Let's give our team a chance to win this weekend.
Before we get out of here, from each of you guys, so we'll start with Sebastian and then to Javi. What are going to be the keys to win this Wake Forest series and get the momentum back in Miami's favor?
On the pitching side, I think it's limiting walks, right? I think that was the big problem in UConn that a lot of people overlooked because you see the box score at the end of the game, right? It was really early in the games where you'd give up a lot of walks, and then UConn would have a timely hit, right? And that would just kill it. And then the relief, they'd give up their hits, but at that point, it wouldn't matter. We were already out of it, right? Against a team like Wake Forest, you cannot afford to get down by a lot early. You need some quality starts. You're going to give up a few runs, right? You need your bats to come alive. That's expected, but you cannot dig yourself a self-made hole with walks.
Yeah, spot on. And I'm glad an outfielder said that, man, because it's so true from a pitching perspective. I think it was a crazy stat. It was like 19 runs scored with 2 outs against UConn. It's insane. It's almost like you see it and it's hard to believe, right? Because you don't see numbers like that. But again, you got to get guys out when you have the chance. You got to get out of innings when you have the chance. So I think for me, D, on the offensive side is we got to get more production out of some guys in the order, man. I think obviously Derek Williams has come on as of late, which has been a nice revelation for the Canes. Daniel Cuvée, like I said, Daniel Cuvée has been doing Daniel Cuvée things, but we got to start seeing guys drive the ball a little bit more. We're kind of middle of the pack in the ACC in terms of home runs, which is crazy because everybody's hitting home runs now. It seems like these teams with, you look at the top of the ACC and the SEC, everybody's hitting home runs 1 through 9. The lineup is stacked with guys who can hit the home run. So got to drive the baseball. We need to have some crooked innings, man. And to Sebastian's point, we got to play from a lead, play from ahead for what seems like the last week or so. We've been playing from behind. It's been tough to play catch up. And in a league where everybody's scoring, man, we got to try and keep the run prevention unit and keep Wake Forest off the base paths, man.
Yeah, just looking at the stat that jumped out to me, and this is like a very basic stat, but I mean, looking at the box score yesterday, I was sitting in my kids' practice watching the game, and I was perusing the box score after. Miami had 7 hits against UCF. UCF had 18 hits. Obviously, the final score reflected it, but it just feels like whether it's UCF, or UConn, we have not had the firepower of the opponent. And given that maybe UF you understand it a little bit more, but man, it's not a good sign heading into ACC play. So you got to hopefully that gets turned around and these guys get hot because look, I was talking to somebody today about this, that if Miami gets into the tournament, they do have good on paper. We'll see how the season plays out, but starters that we probably feel good about talent wise, right? You mentioned Walters being your third. So, if you get in the tournament, could those guys get hot and you go on a run, but that's not the guarantee it has been in the past year, Miami, obviously. And it's going to be a extremely challenging ACC schedule, but hey, Javi, appreciate you joining us again. Bullpen Mafia. You see the shirt, subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts. It is awesome stuff, especially with the baseball season ramping up. Sebastian, you know where to find him on CanesInSight. Going to do a lot more football recruiting stuff too coming up. Stay tuned for some cool stuff we're doing there. Appreciate you guys, and we'll be watching this weekend, and then next week after that, we'll see you at the light. Thanks, D. It's a good time to be a Canes fan, man. It's with a grain of salt, right? The last week has been tough, but there's some really good teams coming into Mark Lay, right? And next week, rivalry weekend against Florida State, man, it's going to be awesome. It's going to be electric. It's a Thursday, Friday, Saturday series, which is a change, right? So we're going to see if Florida State and Miami keep the rotation the same. Jamie Arnold possibly on a Thursday night in Coral Gables will be a lot of fun to watch. So, tough road ahead, but this is they never said it was going to be easy. The conference is loaded. It's going to be fun to watch, and I'm glad I got on with Sebastian, man. I hadn't been on with Sebastian ever. So the young prodigy. That's it, man. I think he's following your Iron Arrow footsteps. There we go. Maybe. Anyways, appreciate you guys, and stay tuned. CanesInSight and Bullpen Mafia. Go Canes. Go Canes.
We good?
Yeah, I think so.